So welcome to Seen Solved, presented by Hubbard-Hall. I'm Tim Pennington, editor of Finishing and Coating. And today we're talking with actually a new face in the industry, Jameson Grout from Hubbard-Hall. And we're going to have a topic today of black oxide. And he calls it Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, which a lot of people are afraid of black oxide. I'm Tim Pennington, and you're listening to Seen Solved, brought to you by Hubbard-Hall. Better results, less chemistry. But Jameson, tell you what, let's start off. I mentioned you're kind of a new face around Hubbard-Hall, but not in the industry, right? The finishing industry. You've been around for a while. Give us a little bit of a background of where you came from and how you got to where you are right now.
Okay, so I got my start about 10 years ago, actually, coming up on the decade. Met a guy in a diner and started working at...
Wait a minute. Have you met a guy in a diner?
Yeah, well...
All right, go right ahead. Keep going.
So yeah, this was back in 2012 era.
Okay, gotcha.
Economy was rough. We were in the recession, and work was hard to come by. I was looking for a few months, and then my uncle actually met a guy in a diner. They were both regulars, and he was complaining that they were having problems finding some people. And my uncle said, "Oh, wait a second, I got a resume in my car." And he ran out and he gave him my resume, and one thing led to another, and that's how I got started working at Heat Bath Corporation in Massachusetts. So.
What was your first job there?
My first job there, so they hired me as a technical service representative, but I started on the bench for about a year, just testing customer samples, learning the chemistry, what it does. And they were slowly taking me on trips here and there. And then I started taking phone calls.
Gotcha. When did you decide this was going to be an industry you wanted to stick with? Is that anything in particular, or you just, it just kind of evolved over time?
I think it evolved over time. The more I learned about it and the more I got into the plating side of it, that's when I knew I was hooked. It's just the coolest stuff in the world, sending current through chemical solutions. I always kind of joke around here that we're alchemists and we're fighting this secret battle against corrosion that the rest of the world doesn't even know about. We're kind of like the King's Men.
True. It is. Yes, it is magic. I will tell that. Where'd you get your training? What school did you go to? What college did you go to?
So I actually, I went to Norwich University up in Vermont just for general bio. I didn't really have a plan, didn't really know what I wanted to do. Took a lot of ecology courses. I thought I was going to be a park ranger, but I guess that would have been a good road, but I'm definitely not regretting it. I like where I am, like what I'm doing.
Right. Norwich, is that the cadets? Is that what the Norwich is?
That is the paramilitary school. So
nickname, is the nickname the cadets?
It is, yeah. That's the mascot.
I have no idea how I know that, but by golly, there you go. If it ever comes up on Jeopardy, there you go. The cadets. There you go.
There you go.
Great. So tell us what you're doing here at Hubbard-Hall. What's your responsibilities, and how are you solving the world's issues and finishing?
Yeah, so I'm a product specialist. I'm in the specialty chemical division, I guess. Just mostly on the road, tech support. Phone calls, emails, customer visits, mostly just troubleshooting. We're solving problems, we're supporting sales, and that's kind of the main directive. Just keep people running, keep them running more optimized, whatever they're asking for.
Gotcha. Somebody's got to do it. I'm glad you're out there. It's not me, but I'm glad you're out there doing it. So let's talk about black oxide, and it does have a fairly dirty and dangerous reputation. I know that some people won't, you mention the word, they'll say, I'm not having that in my shop. Not going to have too much of a liability, things such as that. So tell us what exactly is black oxide and whether you feel it deserves that reputation.
So visually, it definitely does have a reputation. We're talking about this super saturated 285 degree boiling solution, right? It's not your typical plating tank. It's murky, it's got scum all over the top. And you see a lot of shops, they've got salt buildups on the front, they got salt on the floor. So it's definitely a messy process. And we're talking about something that's almost purely caustic. So there are some risks involved, but as far as being scary technology, it's not. It's not intimidating to run, to operate, to keep well maintained. So that's kind of what I want to talk about today. As scary as it will be physically, if you're just conscious of the risks and you have good housekeeping and you're maintaining the tank, then it's an easy process to operate.
Right. And it's much needed, right? It is very much needed in the, I know it's using a lot of, fasteners and weaponry and things like that. It's a really good finish, right? I mean, it really does do the job that people want it to do.
Yeah, it's weird because it kind of walks the line. It's a functional coating. It needs a top coat to be a fully functional coating, but it falls into a lot of industries for decorative purposes, even though that's not really the intention. But like you mentioned, a lot of fasteners, a lot of firearm stuff.
Mm-hmm. Right. Again, let's talk about the boiling point, because that seems to be, what a lot of people, they kind of get a little queasy about that. They don't like having like you said, a cauldron of hot liquid sitting around. Bad things often happen when that's the case. But you mentioned that. What is the boiling point? What's it telling you, and how do you interpret that?
Yeah, so Black Oxide 101, there's really only two things that you need to understand to control the tank. And that's, am I boiling at the right temperature, and am I controlling my sludge content? And if you're on top of that, you really shouldn't have a lot of problems. Everyone always has cleaning problems and whatnot, but the bath itself, that's all you need. So there's no titration you can do in the lab, really. That'll give you a great picture of what the bath's concentration is at. Really, in the field, at the tank, the best thing you can do is just check the boiling point. The chemistry is designed to boil around 285. And if you're gently rolling boiling at 285, you have enough salt in the tank. And that's really it. Adding salt to water raises the boiling point. So you'll either add salt or add water accordingly to make sure you're around that 285, and you should be good to go.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Let's talk sludge control. Let's talk about that. It's not something you normally hear in plating. Take a second. What exactly does that mean, and what is the process of that for the sludge?
Yeah, so sludge is the wild card. It's something that you don't have to deal with most plating processes, and that's what I guess we'll take a step back. So black oxide is a conversion coating. It's not necessarily a plating process, even though it's in plating shops. It's not this additive thing that you can keep building over time. It is, you're dissolving this base layer and you're depositing this oxide crystal on it, and that's it. It's kind of like a cousin to rust. It's called magnetite. It's a crystal. I think it's Fe3O4 off the top of my head. And it is a less stable form of rust. So over time, it will rust. It will turn into your normal red oxide. But that dissolved iron kind of has to go somewhere. So we're looking at this cauldron, as you put it. Since we're boiling, we got a lot of solution movement. We're bringing a lot of hot sodium hydroxide to the surface. That's going to react with a lot of carbon dioxide in the air. And that's where we're getting this sodium carbonate formed. So now I've got sodium carbonate. We call it colloidal iron, that iron in solution. It's a cool word. It sounds fancy, but it just means, kind of moving around, not doing anything. And that's kind of smashing up with that carbonate. And that together is falling out at that sludge. So that's what's on the bottom. There's usually some floating on top. We call that scum or scuzz. And then there's usually, you'll see the salt itself starting to form on the top of the tank, like a cocktail or something.
Right. Do you see a lot of finishers doing black oxide? Some have mentioned it, and it's funny because a couple of people I know, a couple industry people that say they do black oxide, they don't do it. They actually say, well, we tell our people we do it, but we ship it out to somebody else to do it. But give me a percentage wise what you think people actually, of all the shops that are actually doing this type of operation of black oxide?
So plating shops that happen to have a black oxide process, you're right, is pretty low. Around here, it's probably 5-10%, if even. It is normally a dedicated shop, and there's quite a few of those smaller ones around here, and that's it. They have 2 or 3 black oxide lines, and they have plenty of work to keep themselves staffed and busy. They're normally slammed. Black oxide, like I said, it's easy to control. It's a very simple process. It's not that sophisticated. So we're talking high volume work, barrels, racking. There's a lot of captive shops that do black oxide. We mentioned firearms. It's very big there. Pretty much every major gun manufacturer has their own black oxide line internally. And then they also have a host of 3 or 4 local shops who have to help with the overflow, all the little components. Maybe people specialize in different base materials, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, like I said, and the ones that I know a couple in Chicago that they're running all the time, right? That's all they do, and they do it very, very well, and they have very large tanks, but they're bustling. I mean, it's a lot of work they're getting, because I think a lot of people just don't decide not to get into it.
It's kind of hard to break into as well, because it's more of a low margin process. Like, the money is in the volume, so it's hard to just start up and try to get competitive in that kind of environment. You really can't specialize,
Right. Right. What are some common quality issues you see some shops having with this, and really how with their black oxide line, and how are they fixing it? What seems to be some things that crop up?
Yeah, so back to the sludge control we were talking about. So that sludge is falling off, and a lot of it is settling on the bottom. Most tanks in this industry are gas under fired. You do see some electrical heaters here and there, but you get all this sludge falling off, and it's going to grow on the bottom. It's going to get denser, and quality issues stemming out of that. I remember a few years ago, I was at a gun customer, and they're running these vertical gun barrels. And I take the phone call. It started with a call. And he's like, yeah, we're coming out of the tank, and the top third of every barrel's gray. And we don't know why the tank's doing this. So my mentor always preached that, the chemistry is not smart enough to do that, right? So something else has to be going on. The chemistry can't pick and choose what it wants to blacken. So I took a trip out there, and we were looking at the sludge. And it had just grown to a point from poor maintenance that the top third of the gun barrel was sitting in the sludge. So it wasn't seeing any fresh solution. It couldn't blacken. So desludging is part of a normal protocol. There's a couple different ways to approach it. But the most effective way is to get in there if you're slightly below operating temperature and have some kind of equipment to just scoop it out. If your tanks are set up properly, you can decant the liquid on top, and then you can really get in the tank and get the sludge out. But if you let it just grow and grow and grow, it will start to touch parts. And then you actually run into some safety concerns at that point too. Mm-hmm. One of the big, I want to say boogeyman terms, but one of the bad things that can happen in a black oxide process is what's called an eruption. And it's exactly what it sounds like. And what happens is if you're not desludging properly, if you're letting things go too far, that sludge is going to get thick on the bottom. And if any liquid gets under that, it can superheat from those gas under fire heaters, and it's going to have to go somewhere eventually. It'll break through the sludge. You'll get solution kind of burp up. I've seen you'll see it on the walls, on some ceilings. It's not funny. It can be kind of scary, but it's also easily preventable if you just stay on top of your housekeeping.
Right. Well, let me ask you that. Talk about housekeeping. What are they doing? When should they be desludging or whatever it is you're talking about? When should that be happening?
Yeah, so it's all based on volume. Things you can start with a calendar and then dial it in from there. Some shops need to do it once a year. Some need to be every 6 months. Some of our super high volume gun captive shops, they're doing it every other month. Now those guys, they're set up for it, so they can do a really effective job. But even just the minimal, having some kind of tool on hand, and at the end of the week, you scoop some out the bottom, that'll keep you in great shape for a long time. It'll keep that colloidal iron from building. It'll keep that sludge blanket from building. The other thing that can happen, if you wait too long and you get too much of that iron in solution, you'll see the bath itself will start to turn red. Your parts will start to turn red. And at that point, you can't fix the parts. You can strip and re-black oxide, but really you have to get the iron out of the bath at that point, or you're too far gone and you just have to dump it, start from scratch.
What are some of the other products that you have, the black oxide products you all have that, what do they do? And what do they specialize in?
All right, yeah. So for the hot black, just the baseline flagship product, that's just for normal steel, right? General steel processing. You do need a separate chemistry if you want to blacken stainless steel. It runs at a different temperature range. The package is a little different. We do have some black oxides for copper, copper-based alloys, brass, that kind of stuff. And those need, it's completely different technology. They run at different temperature ranges. They need some different pretreatment to get the black. And then there's also the cold blacks on the market. It's a bunch of different room temperature available options.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, when you say cold black, are you talking about it's not being heated, right?
Yeah, or if it is heated, it's minimal heat. Those cold blacks or room temperature blacks, they're not a traditional black oxide, so you won't see any of the more popular functional applications using those, because it's not that magnetite crystal. It's more of just a coloring. It's not really the same functional coating. So they're almost completely different technologies, even though they do kind of get umbrellaed together a lot. And you do see a lot of people asking like, oh, hey, we can save a lot of energy by switching to one of these cold blacks, but it's not going to meet the same like topological considerations.
Right. You know, like you mentioned, I mean, Oxide, the one I know I visited out in Prescott, Arizona, was the Ruger plant. And, you know, a lot of those, you know, I remember them telling me that, you know, people are looking at these finishes who have a you know, handgun or a firearm as works of art. I mean, they're really looking at those. And so it's hard to get that right. I mean, because you're going to have people looking at it more of a, like you said, a decorative finish than a functional finish with that.
Yeah. And the gun industry, they actually, some of them run at slightly different parameters too, just because they do take it a little more serious. They used to run a lot of, the traditional gun industry would run 2 different black tanks, because they felt it gave them this deeper shade of black. You don't see that too much anymore, but they do tend to run a little bit longer immersion times just for that level of confidence. Some people do say that you see a little bit of difference. I'm not a quality guy. You know, my eye's not that good. For the most part, you know, 15 minutes to a half an hour, the surface is converted. You should be good to go. But you do see a lot of them looking for that jewelry finish. They'll go more like a 45 minute for more depth.
What's the most interesting thing you've ever seen black oxide on it? Anything come to mind?
Nothing really comes to mind. I mean, I have been involved in some pretty cool, like event firearms. You know, they've tried some special finishes. Black oxide's, it's cool because it's kind of, there's not much you can do with it itself, but what you do to the metal beforehand will have a huge impact on the final coating. So seeing people play around with different matte finishes, different high gloss applications, we can get some really different kind of colors coming out the back end. You can almost get like some shades of blue depending on how you polish it.
Right. Yeah. Like I said, it's and I've seen a lot, just like I said, in fasteners and a lot of things that just mass production with those. But I was just curious about the anything you've seen as a kind of a one-off that's ever come up. I'm sure somebody's called for it at some point with that. But well, great. Listen, it's been a great tune up on black oxide. And Jameson, thanks for joining us today. And I'm sure you're going to be joining us many times going ahead in the future now that you're with Hubbard-Hall. So I very much appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
Seen Solved is brought to you by Hubbard-Hall. Better results, less chemistry. For more podcasts, go to hubbardhall.com or wherever you get your podcasts.